Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles. I want to welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show. And in today's episode, I got a pretty interesting topic for you guys. And the topic is, should Kawhi Leonard have fought to get Jimmy Butler over Paul George? So that's the topic I want to get into in today's video. But before we get into that, I want you guys to please make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified whenever we drop our content. And be sure to check out this show on the Dreamerspro Podcast, which we have linked in the description below. And this is your first time to the channel, I just want to tell you that on this show, this is where we cover a lot of hot topics, sports debates, and we give you a first perspective on sports, on how we see it. So welcome to the channel. With that being said, let's just get straight into the topic here. So, I think it's a pretty interesting topic that I wanted to cover, given the fact of how the NBA playoffs ended up transpiring, and now we're seeing kind of an expected foe in the Lakers in the finals, although some of us had the Clippers being there. But nevertheless, the Lakers are a really good team. They had the number one seed in the Western Conference, so it's not such a huge surprise that they're there. Instead, or rather, the surprise is that they didn't play against the Clippers in the Western Conference Finals. Now, on the Eastern Conference side, though, I picked the Milwaukee Bucks to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. And some people would have probably picked the Raptors to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. But in this particular instance, what we have is the Miami Heat. And the Miami Heat have just made it there off of grit, great ball movement, great coaching, great leadership by Jimmy Butler. And somehow, some way, they find themselves in the Eastern Conference, in the NBA Championship. And to me, I think it's a testament to Jimmy Butler and how good he's been for this team all throughout in the bubble this year. Now, if we look at Jimmy Butler, if we look at his production this season, he averaged about 20 points a game for the season, 6.7 rebounds, and 6 assists. So he was very solid. He did a great job rebounding the ball. Actually, a very good job at the shooting guard position to get you 7 rebounds a game. And he was a great playmaker for the team. In the playoffs, his points per game have gone up to 22 points a game. He's shooting 48% from the field, so he's shooting a very high field goal percentage. He's shooting 34% from the three-point line, although he's only attempting 2, so he doesn't attempt a lot of three-pointers. He's shooting 86% from the free throw line, getting you 6.2 rebounds, 5.7 assists, and 1.9 steals, and just been an overall great leader. I think the intangibles that Jimmy Butler brings to the court go way beyond just the numbers that he's just way beyond the production that you see on the stat sheet. Now, for this to make sense, let's just go back and look at the history of Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard, as you guys remember, ended up winning the title for the Toronto Raptors last season. And he had a very important decision to make on whether or not he was going to remain with the team that he had won this title with great organization, great city, or go play for LA. And it turned out there were a few things that were going to determine whether or not he stayed with the Raptors or moved on, or even went to go play with the Clippers. Essentially, what he wanted was another big name player to play with him, right? He wanted to get another big name player, and he basically told the Raptors management, he said, listen, if you guys want me to stay, I need you to get rid of Pascal Siakam. I mean, these are just in, this is the way I saw the conversation going. But essentially what he says, listen, I want you guys to get me somebody else for Pascal Siakam. You either get me Paul George or someone else. And the Toronto Raptors were not willing to part ways with Pascal Siakam. So Kawhi Leonard decided to walk. He walked, and now he told the team that he wanted to go play with, in this case, the Los Angeles Clippers. He said, the only way I'm coming is if you get me Paul George. Now, the story that went under the radar, however, was he initially approached Jimmy Butler and others like Kevin Durant, I believe so. But I know that he approached Jimmy Butler. Now, Jimmy Butler was playing at the time with the Philadelphia 76ers, although the season was over, and he had just played against Kawhi Leonard in the playoffs. And I know Kawhi got a front row seat of how Jimmy Butler is just a great two-way player and what a great competitor he was, given the fact that he played against him in a 7-game series in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Now, Jimmy Butler decided, however, that he wanted to go play with the Miami Heat and go be with that organization because he feels like they have the same values and principles with Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra and what they had going on there. So he decided he wanted to go play with that team. And Kawhi Leonard ended up getting Paul George. Fine, we all know this, right? But I'm just giving you a backstory to sort of crystallize the point I'm trying to illustrate here in this video. Now, he ended up getting Paul George, and Paul George was pretty much up and down all season, right? If you look at Paul George's numbers in the regular season, he averaged 21.5 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 3.9 assists. So essentially, he had better numbers than Jimmy Butler, and he's a much more, he's a much more prolific scorer, a much more dynamic scorer. So looking at the two, you would say obviously Paul George is the obvious pick. And when he had Paul George, I was one of the people that felt Paul George was good enough for him to get the job done. In this case, the job being win the NBA title, or at least come out of the Western Conference. Now, what happened? They went through the season and they got into the playoffs, right? And Paul George grossly underperformed. All of his numbers went down. But it's not just about his numbers. He wasn't competitive. Now, let me say this. Okay, let me say this. I said throughout the playoffs that I liked the way Paul George played defense. I think he played fantastic defense, right? On the ball defense. I think he's a fantastic on the ball defender. And in some cases, maybe he's a better on the ball defender than Jimmy Butler because of his size. I think Jimmy Butler is about 6'5", if I'm not mistaken. Jimmy Butler's 6'7". I was wrong. I thought he was 6'5". He's actually 6'7", and Paul George, I believe, is 6'8". So Paul George is slightly bigger than he is. And I like the defense that Paul George played in the playoffs, and I said that. However, he just couldn't come up big when you needed him. Time and time and time and time and time again. Now, some people may say, well, he still averaged more points than Jimmy Butler in the playoffs. Yes, he did. However, Paul George's potential is greater as far as an offensive score than that of Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler for the season averaged 20 points, right? In the playoffs, he averaged 22 points. Paul George, when he came back, when the season resumed in the NBA bubble, when he was healthy at least, he was averaging 25.5 points. When he got into the playoffs, his points production dropped by 5.5 points to 20 points per game. So the swing is much greater, right? That type of swing is just too great for somebody, at that level. Now, Paul George grossly underperformed, although he played great defense, I believe so. Jimmy Butler, on the other hand, he exceeded expectations. And when he got to the finals in Game 3, he dropped a 40-point triple-double, and some people are saying that's probably the greatest one-game performance anyone has seen in the NBA Finals, and it was unbelievable. It was a tour de force what he put forward in that game, Game 3. And while I'm watching all this, listening to the comments that Paul George had saying, after they got knocked out, saying, it wasn't a do or die season for us. It wasn't a make it or break it season. We're going to be back next year competing. And I didn't like that, right? Because it didn't show a lot of competitiveness. He didn't seem too angry about it. And I'm saying to myself, what if Kawhi had Jimmy Butler instead of this guy? Right? Because it goes beyond just the numbers you produce on the court. What intangibles are you bringing to the court? Now, imagine if Jimmy Butler was on this team and we heard about all of these chemistry issues, guys behaving like divas on the team like this. Imagine if Jimmy was there, right? Some people say, hey, listen, Kawhi is not a vocal enough leader, but we know Jimmy is. We know Jimmy would have gotten the faces of some of these guys. Now, we knew him and Kawhi were not going to have an issue because Kawhi took his game to the next level. And if you look at his numbers in the playoffs, if you look at his regular season production, he averaged 27 points, 7.1 rebounds, and 4.9 assists in the regular season. But if you look at his playoff production, everything went up. Averaged 28 points per game. He averaged 9.3 rebounds. So his rebounds went up by almost 2.5 rebounds. His assists went up to 5.5 assists. He was averaging about 1.8 steals a game in the regular season. He was averaging in the playoffs 2.3 steals. So his numbers went up. What I expected from Kawhi, I expect excellence from him. It's just that he had one of his worst games in his career on a Game 7, which was the worst night to have that game. But I believe that if Kawhi was if Jimmy Butler was in that game as a replacement instead of Paul George, I guarantee you that Game 7 would have been way more competitive than it was, especially in that fourth quarter. They wouldn't have gone down like that with Jimmy on the court. That's just my opinion. And I think Kawhi Leonard should have probably fought to go after Jimmy Butler a little bit harder, because no one can contest this fact that although Paul George may be a better player, Jimmy Butler is a way better competitor than PG, and we're seeing it. The guy refuses to lay down against these Lakers, and he's the one that is infusing his teammates with self-confidence, saying, listen, I believe we can win, although we all know that they're overmatched. And somehow they're in these games, somehow with their number one scorer not even playing, being injured. I forgot his name. Goran, I can't remember his name. I don't want to butcher his name. Him not even being there, and these guys are just in this series with pure grit. So for me, I think there's no question that Jimmy Butler was a much better competitor. And in a particular instance like this, maybe that's what Kawhi Leonard needed. Now, finally, it would have probably cost you less because Paul George is getting paid $33 million a year to Jimmy Butler's $16. So Paul George is twice as costly than Jimmy Butler is. Now, obviously, we can't go back and redo things, but it makes me think like, man, imagine if Kawhi Leonard had fought just a little bit harder to get Jimmy Butler and tried a little bit harder to convince him to come play with him instead of going to the Miami Heat. We'll never know, but I think he should have fought a little bit harder. Now, obviously, I wasn't there. I don't know the conversations that they had. I don't know if Jimmy just said, hey, man, I'm going to Miami, man. Are you kidding me? And just hung up the phone. We don't know that. I don't think it went that way, but we don't know that. So for me, I think it's a pretty good question looking at what Jimmy was able to do with the Miami Heat this season. So what I want to know from you guys is, do you think that Kawhi Leonard should have fought very, 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 very hard to get Jimmy Butler over Paul George? Or do you think that, you know what, listen, Paul George can have a great series, fine, but if you have to roll the dice again, you'd rather have Paul George than Jimmy Butler? Whatever you guys think, please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Also, be sure to check out some of our other videos that we put out. We're going to link a video at the end of this video here where we spoke about whether or not Kawhi Leonard should he have stayed with the Toronto Raptors. If you haven't seen that video, please make sure you check that out and check out some of our other content. Just comb through the channel. I think you're going to enjoy a lot of content that we post if you enjoyed this video. So once again, thank you guys for your attention. This is Charles here from Dreamerspro. Wishing you guys an amazing day. Peace.